My name is Bob McCauley. I was born on September 20th, 1957 in Lansing, Michigan, to Marie and Bob McCauley. My mother's maiden name was Rose Barnaby, and she grew up in Massachusetts. My father, he grew up in New Mexico, and they kind of moved all over the place. His father was a prospector and some other things. He worked on the railroad for a while. Anyway, I grew up mostly in Lansing, Michigan. When I was 9, we moved to Hawaii for a year, and that was quite an experience. I didn't enjoy it as much as my sister. My sister is 8 years older than me, almost, and that's Nancy McCauley. And she went to Michigan State University. I went to Michigan State University. My father, he had a doctorate from MIT, master's from Michigan State University in civil engineering, and then went to MIT, got a doctorate there, and came back and taught at Michigan State for many years until he opened his own engineering company called Wolverine Engineers, and that's where I worked when I was a kid. When I say kid, I started at about 14, and then I worked probably on and off over the next 12 years, but I never wanted to be an engineer or a land surveyor. So it was Wolverine Engineers and Land Surveyors. He opened that company, or started, with George Young, and George Young's a great guy. They were two honest people, very hard workers, and usually in partnerships you find one's lazy and one isn't. So good partnerships, you got two hard workers, and then we're not going to rip each other off. So I went to Lansing Eastern High School, and I graduated in 1975. Had a great time. I was a great runner in high school. I grew up early on a lot of junk foods, and it wasn't until after high school that I began to really look at food as something healthier. Even one of my first few years in college, I would just ate garbage. I went to Western Michigan University for 1 year, and then I came back and I finished up because I couldn't get into Michigan State because my grades weren't good enough. So when I was in high school, all I did was run track and cross country. So I was the best runner in the school. I set the school record in the mile at the time, 4:28. So it was a really good mile. And but when I got into college, I was a nobody. I was not good enough to really compete at that level. I did run a 4:25 mile in practice down at Western Michigan University on a really, really windy day, and that's hard to do. Anyway, so I went through college, and then I went through 3 years, and then I took a year off and I went and lived in Israel. And I lived in 2 different kibbutz, Acharod and Niram, not Nirim, but Niram. And both those, and I traveled all over the country, 1978, 79, and it was quite an experience, and it really opened up. Really brings you, like, the Bible is right there. Bible's like a guide almost. You can read in the Bible and then go look at the place that it happened, and it's just identical. And you can see where Jesus walked and all this. It's quite an amazing country, most beautiful country I've ever seen. I've traveled to many, many countries through the years, and I've lived a lot of different places. I lived, as I said, Israel, and that was 78, 79, so I went to the Sinai Desert. I saw where the Jews went from actually the Sinai Desert into Saudi Arabia when they were escaping the Egyptians. And so that's called, the beach is called Nuweiba. So I've been there, and there's columns set up to commemorate that, but at the time I was there, I didn't know that was the place where they crossed. But so I was on that beach looking, and that's where they crossed over. So at any rate, it really brings you home when you realize about these things. So and I was on an island in Greece, Patmos, and I think it's called Patmos at the time and Patmos now, or maybe it switched. I can't remember, but that's where John got the revelation. Saint John. No one knows which one that John that was for sure, but he got the book of the Revelation. He saw that vision and he wrote it. And so there's a cave there. And but when I went there to that island, I didn't know that was there, so I never saw it. So I do have an interesting story about my time. Spent about a week there with this guy. He was kind of a character. At any rate, I'll tell that story another time. I'll be telling a lot of stories on this channel. I've lived an interesting life, that's for sure. So I have lived. When I was after college, let's say I came back from Israel, finished up college, graduated with a degree in journalism from Michigan State. It was a totally different college back then. I wouldn't want to go there these days. I think it's too big and too impersonal, and they just want money, and that's all they care about. I went to college for $5,000 back then. That's include all my time, all my board, room, everything, 5,000. You couldn't think to do that. A friend of mine, a good friend, Ken Beach, he worked his way through college. You could never do that now. I mean, it's too expensive. I mean, he just worked part-time and had no money and just worked his way right through it. It's very impressive. So when I graduated from college, I decided I wanted to travel around the world. As I said, lived an interesting life. So I traveled across the United States with a friend of mine, Judy Leverah, and then I met her in Israel. And then we parted ways in L.A., and I went on to Hawaii for a few days, and then I went to Korea and visited my friend Ken Beach, spent a month there, traveled around Korea. And it was very primitive back in 1980. This would have been 80. And then, I went on, we went to Japan, went through Japan all the way up from Shimonoseki to Tokyo. And then I left and went to Hong Kong. I spent some time there. And then I went to Thailand. I was in Bangkok, and that was pretty primitive back then, and kind of a dangerous area. I had to stay in a hotel, and there was full of prostitutes, and they kept wanting to kick me out of this hotel because I wouldn't take a prostitute. So I'll tell you that story sometime. I actually wrote a story about that. It was an interesting experience. But I was there for a few weeks, got a really cheap air ticket, which actually took me all the way in many, many stops going from Bangkok all the way around to New York City. So I had all these tickets, air tickets that I could use. So anyway, from there I flew to India, and then I spent 6 months in India. So that's a place I lived, and I traveled all over the country. I landed in Delhi, and I went up to the Golden Temple in Jammu, and then I went up to Srinagar and saw Kashmir, and you can't even go up there these days. And I got so sick, I thought I was going to die, and I really thought this was it. I got such bad dysentery. I mean, I never felt like that in my life. It was freezing cold. I was there in about September, October, probably October. And anyway, obviously I did survive it, but man, it left some scars. I mean, I was kind of PSD. I almost had, I kept thinking maybe I did die there, and that nothing was really real after that in India, that I had died in this place. But anyway, I'll tell you about the time, by the way, I got locked in the room with a complete madman when I was at the Golden Temple. I can't remember. Guru Ram Das, that's where I stayed. Guru Ram Das, they let you stay for free, and they'd feed you every day. So it wasn't too bad. Dal and chapati. So chapati is like a little bread, and dal is soup. And so anyway, I traveled through the rest of the country. I saw the Dalai Lama in 1980 before anybody had heard of the Dalai Lama. He lived in Dharamsala, so that's where I saw him. He had escaped from Tibet, so I was there. I just saw him from a distance. He had been traveling to the United States when he just got back when I saw him. So, but I traveled to Haridwar. It's another holy city. Rishikesh is there, and I saw the Guru Ma. She's a famous saint there. And actually, we were waiting, and then a bunch of rich people came in a car. And they're Americans. Now, you didn't see cars in India. I hardly saw any cars. I mean, people didn't own a car. It's totally different now. I've been to India. I've been to India 3 times, but it's changed beyond belief. And there's actually 50% people more there now today, and today is 2020. It's actually April Fool's, 2022. So I traveled the rest of the way through India. I'll tell you some tales about that. I went down to Vrindavana. That's where Krishna lived. I spent some time there with the Hare Krishnas, and they're kind of fanatics in that area. They really are. And then I went to Puri. I went to Calcutta, and then I went to Puri. That's where they got the Jagannath Temple. And then I went down to Madras, now they call that Chennai, and I stopped in Bangalore. There was nothing in Bangalore when I was in India. And then on to Bombay, and I left. So I flew to Italy, and then came up through Italy, traveled through Europe for a couple months, and then ended up in Paris. And I lived in Paris for about 8 months. And then I was trying to be a writer and wanted to write. I'm a writer. These are my books behind me, so must have taken. I used to hang out in Shakespeare and Company. And then I came back to, I went to Ireland with Yoko Hara, my girlfriend. And we traveled through Ireland for about a month. I felt so at home. I never drank so much Guinness in my life. Guinness is really good over there. It's not so good here. I mean, it's really a totally different thing. But I ended up going to England to come back to the U.S., and I had to live in Heathrow Airport for 2 days because I couldn't get I had a standby ticket back then, and so I couldn't find a flight. And finally, the guy says, "You're never going to get back to New York. These rich New Yorkers are just going to buy all the tickets. You'll be here for weeks. Fly to Dallas Airport in Washington, and then just take the bus." And I, what a great idea! So that's exactly what I did. I took the bus, and then I ended up in New York, and I met my girlfriend Yoko. She lived there up in Harlem on 116th, and anyway, so spent a few weeks there. Came back, and there I was, couldn't find a job. I had to go out to Yellowstone National Park to scrub toilets. So here I graduated from college. I went to I traveled around the world. I lived in Israel, and I can find no job in 1981. It was the worst economy. Thanks, Jimmy Carter. And it's just awful. I had to go. I just wanted to get out of the house. I couldn't stand living there anyway. I mean, I'd take anything. So I took a job in Yellowstone National Park at Mammoth Falls, and I was there the whole summer. And I cleaned toilets, amongst other things. Kind of the girl that ran the place, and she was in charge of everything. She kind of fell for me, so it made my life a lot more easy, let me tell you. So anyway, from there I went down, and I traveled around the rest of the United States, and came back home, and I was there for a while, and then I got in the car again, and this time with Yoko, and we traveled across the United States, and I went all the way out to Seattle and San Francisco and everything. I could not find a job doing anything. Settled down. There was just no work. So I ended up in California, saw my friends down in LA. They were in Torrance. And then I drove back, and I just couldn't find anything. But eventually, so I decided I was going to join the Jesuits. That's another long story, but I went to many different religious orders. I went to I stayed at a Benedict monastery out in Christ in the Desert. There was another one near Sedona. I stayed out there for quite a while. Thought I might be a monk. And I just said, being a monk, I love it, but I love doing it. I love being there. But I'm a really strong Catholic. And because I understand the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church is not what you see in the scandals in the Vatican and all that. There's Catholicism. That's what I believe in. So at any rate, I came back and then decided to become a Jesuit, but they wouldn't let me in because, frankly, they knew that I wasn't going to accept homosexuality as being okay, and there was a big group in the church called Dignity, and they were trying to run everything, and so I just said, this is wrong. I didn't make a big deal out of it, but anyway, one guy in the Jesuits found out about it, so he kept me out. To be honest with you, God has always watched out for me, so it's probably good I didn't get into the Jesuits. So I came back, and then I ended up working at my dad's place again at Wolverine Engineers. He had developed a way of coating water main pipe so it wouldn't rust. And, lo and behold, a company wanted to develop it. It's kind of a long story, but I moved out to New Jersey, the armpit of the United States. And what a terrible place. But it toughened me up, man, I'll tell you something. So it's a long story. I worked for some surveyors out there, some mortgage surveyors and some land surveyors. I worked for two different ones, Keelan and Pika were the name of the guys. They're long gone. These are guys all from Newark who had lived in Newark in the 60s, and then it burned down to the ground, and everybody moved out of Newark, just like they moved out of Detroit. They destroyed the cities in the 60s. Terrible. The cities before the the 40s and the 50s and into the city. They were great places, and then they burned them to the ground. Baltimore is a crap hole. I mean, you look at these great American cities that are just gone. Detroit, Newark. So, any rate, I lived out there, and I worked right in Newark, and we did land surveying and everything, and it's a rough place, let me tell you, a very rough place. So I worked, ended up becoming a temp at a lot of places, and then I worked at a law firm for 5 years, Debevoise and Plimpton, and D&P, and they're a huge law firm, and that turned me into an absolute professional, and I had a lot of time in my hands sitting there. I was a legal secretary. You know, I learned everything about legal stuff. I've written my own contracts. I never let a lawyer intimidate me because I understand what they do and how they do it. I just never got a law degree. No thanks. And so I was out there for that was a 9-year sentence. I mean 9 years. And but out in New York, I lived in Jersey. I lived in Lyndhurst, New Jersey, 178 Fern Avenue. And I got as tough as those people. I mean, so I got married to Pilar Datus, and we had one child out there, Daniel. And then we came back, and I was on a bus one day, and I'm riding into New York City, and I look down, and it says, you know, the bottled water is going to be huge in the 1990s. This is about 1992. And I looked and I went, wow, that's what I want to do. I decided right then and there. So I came back. My father helped me kind of get started. We had some filtered water kiosk in these supermarkets. We had 5 or 7 of those. And that was Spartan Water Company. Then I started my own company, Spartan Enterprises. And that's where I've been in business now almost 29 years. So it's been done pretty good. I started out in bottled water, and I killed it in Target. Man, I just dominated everything with Michigan Mineral, premium natural water. Healthy water, pure taste, nothing better. Nothing better, nothing better. So I have my own water store at 6439 West Saginaw Highway, right across from a Kroger's. And I was there for 17 years. I built the company up. I got interested in first ionized water. Somebody walked in with some, then spirulina and chlorella, and then I was always kind of a health fanatic. After I got back from Israel, I got interested in health. And then when I went to India, I became a vegetarian in India. So I've been a vegetarian 40 years now. I'm 64 years old. So 40 years this year. And I'll be 41 in October. So meatless Fridays is not a problem for Bob McCauley. No. So anyway, I spent 17 years at the first place. Then I found 16280 National Parkway is the greatest location on earth to run a business like mine. I'm a huge importer now. I'm the largest importer of chlorella and spirulina in the U.S. And I just did it by sticking with it and believing in these 2 superfoods. One of the largest importers of ionized water. I've written all these books, but that's how I got going. And I started out in bottled water and became, I wanted some kind of credential. I became a certified nutritional consultant. Then I became a master herbalist, and then a naturopathic doctor. And most of what I know about health is through experience. You got to experience it yourself. So I'm a raw food vegan. I take it very seriously. I eat very few cooked foods, less and less all the time. So that's what I do. And then in 2008, I went to Taiwan, where I get most of my products. And I met my wife, Rose. And my first wife, Pilar, she had divorced me back in around 2000, and it was her idea, 100%, not mine at all. I tried to say no. But I met Rose, and she's the love of my life. She's the best person I've ever known in my life, and she's beautiful, and she's loyal. And so we've just always been together ever since, and she always takes care of me. So Rose and I have been together 14 years. 14 years, I think, yeah. So a long time. People thought that was going to last. She's 25 years younger than me, and she's beautiful. And but I stay in great shape. I'm 64. I still run a 6-minute mile. So you just got to stick with it and keep doing it. Well, anyway, that's just a little bit about my life. I just thought I'd introduce it to you and kind of give you a background on who I am and where I came from, how I got here. So that's how that happened. And you know, I'll keep telling stories little by little, and when it hits me, I'll tell another story. And it's just about my life, my philosophy. You know, right now I've gone back to the traditional Latin Mass, that church, the real Catholic Church. I hate to call it the traditional Latin Mass, because it's just the Mass of the ages. It's the Mass of all times. It's where heaven and earth come together. And the Novus Ordo, the new Mass, is just really just watered down kind of crap. I really hate it. And now that I know about it, I mean, so from a guy who's going to once be a priest. So I go there now. That's a very important part of my life. And I work all day. I write books. I'm writing some new fiction. I'm always writing something. I'm putting my books on Audible, so audio versions of those. So there's always something new. You'll always be happy if you stay busy in your life and have a purpose. Always. Bob McCauley, and we'll make another one of these soon. Hope you enjoyed this one.